Okay, so yes, you are looking at the PDF file that we will use as material throughout the course. And I'm not going to say you definitely need it to keep up with the course, but it will make it that much easier for you to keep up and also retain what we will learn throughout the course. Okay, so it consists of 14 pages, and I will be using it for efficient communication. So let's get started. In page number 2, it talks about the fact that colors can be vocabularily divided into two categories. So usually colors in English, for example, can be nouns and it can also be adjectives, right? They can be adjectives and they can also be nouns. But in Korean, you have to know whether the color that you are using is a color that can be a noun and an adjective, or a color that can only be a noun. Okay, so I will elaborate on what I mean by that. So, for example, let's say I'm going to say something like, I like coffee. Or I like music. Or I like snow, for example. Okay, so what do we have? We have the subject I, we have the verb like, and we have objects here. What is an object? The target of some kind of a verb. What do I like? Coffee. What do I like? Music. What do I like? Snow. Okay, so you can see coffee, music, and snow, yes, staying in the object position when it comes to part of speech, and only a noun can be an object. So, well, I can also say, I like purple. So, you can see that, yes, I can use a color also as an object, which tells me that a color can have noun properties. It can be a noun. For example, let's say I have a roommate, and this roommate comes to me and says, hey, I'm sorry, I should have asked you first, but to be honest, I already decorated our room. Everything is in purple. I'm sorry about that. And I'm gonna say, well, it's fine, that's fine with me. I like purple. So, as you can see, I can use a color as a noun. That's why I can use it as an object. Okay, but, well, a color can also be an adjective, right? For example, if I want to say, I, or something like, did you see my purple hat? Okay, so in this case, I am not using purple as a noun, I'm using it as an attributive adjective to place it in front of a noun, to provide that noun with some kind of properties, the properties of being purple. Okay, so yes, a color, usually in English, that is, can be a noun and it can be an adjective. But once again, in Korean, we will make sure that we know whether the color that we are using is a color that can only be a noun, or is it a color that can be a noun and an adjective. Okay, so a lot of times when you see colors in Korean, you would see at the end the 색 syllable. For example, with purple, 보라색. 보라색, purple, 보라색. Well, with green, for example, 초록색. Okay, purple and green. And in both cases, you see 색 at the end. If you see a color and it has the syllable 색 at the very end, then it means that it is being used as a noun, because 색 literally means color. So when you see a color that has 색 at the end, it means that it's a noun and you are saying the color purple, the color green, and they are once again nouns. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Should we continue? Okay. So, if you go to page number 2, the PDF file, if you go to page number 2, yes, it shows you typical examples of colors that can only be nouns. So brown, purple, gray, orange, green, and pink. So as you can see, they all have 색. Okay, so 색 at the end means color. Therefore, when you say, for example, 초록색, you are saying the color green as a noun. Okay, so, well, you might ask the question, why do we have two greens? Well, yes, I'm pretty sure that some of you might be already guessing the answer. Yes, the slogan of our curriculum, Escape Poetic Korean. 녹색 is poetic. Okay, so it's going to sound extremely poetic if you try to use it in just a normal life situation. So, yes, use 초록색 for green. Okay, now, then we talked about the fact that these colors can only be nouns. Then you can ask a very fundamental and technical question, which is, if that's the case, am I severely limited when it comes to how I can use colors? Am I very limited then? Because if I can use a color as a noun and also as an adjective, then I can be very flexible when it comes to using colors within a sentence. For example, I can say something like, well, I like, once again, let's say green. I like green. In this case, in English, yes, I'm using green as a noun because only a noun can be an object, once again. But I can also use it as an adjective. And adjectives, there are two types of adjectives, right? An attributive adjective and a predicative adjective. So what is an attributive adjective? An adjective that you place in front of some kind of a noun to provide that noun with some kind of properties. Okay, so I like green cars. Okay, so in this case, I can also use it like this as an attributive adjective, in English that is. And because I can use it as an adjective, yes, I can use it as an attributive adjective, or I can use it as a predicative adjective. What is a predicative adjective? An adjective that you do not place in front of a noun. So, I like green cars. I placed it in front of a noun, so I'm using it as an attributive adjective. In this case, I did not place it in front of a noun, therefore I'm using it as a predicative adjective. So as you can see, well, because in English I can use green as a noun and adjectives, well, I can be very flexible with it. So, well, if you say that you can only use green as a noun, does it mean that I'm severely limited and it means that I can't do something like, I can't say something like, I like green cars and the car is green? Does it mean that I can't do that? Of course not. Of course not. You're just going to do it in a different way. So, first, let's talk about when you are trying to use a color as an attributive adjective. Well, if you don't have that option, the option of using a color as an attributive adjective, well, all we're going to do is we're going to figure out another way of doing it. Because when you are using an attributive adjective, it means that you are directly placing it right next to the noun to provide properties, right? Well, that's not the only way you can do it then. Placing an attributive adjective is not the only way you can do it. For example, I can say, I like, let's say, honest people. Let's just say, I like honest people. So, I wanted to, yes, in this case, I used an attributive adjective to modify some kind of a noun that comes right after it. So that I can provide the noun with some kind of properties. However, I can also do basically the same thing by saying, I like people of honesty. Okay, so now what does of do? Of indicates relationship between two nouns. It connects two nouns and it is used to indicate some kind of relationship between the two nouns. Okay, well, if that's the case, we figured out a way of basically saying I like honest people without using an attributive adjective. I can use two nouns to basically do the same thing. Well, then now we know how to do it then. I said you can only use green as a noun, so if you want to say something like I like green cars, well, you don't need an attributive adjective. You can do it this way by saying I like cars of the color green. So you can use of to do it. Does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Okay, so then how would I say something like this then? I have the object people of honesty. Well, I'm sorry. So let's say I want to say I like green cars, but I'm not going to do it that way. Instead of saying I like green cars, I'm going to say I like cars of the color green. Well, let's try to do that then. Now it means that you really have to get used to using of, right? Well, what I just said, there's a little bit of an irony there. But anyway, I'll elaborate after I finish writing the sentence. The color green of the, I'm sorry, the color green. Okay, so when you are using of, placing it in between two nouns, you have to keep two things in mind, right? Two things in mind. Number one, you're going to have the order between the two nouns reversed. And ironically speaking, the best way of using of is not to use it at all, right? Because it's extremely poetic if you use it in Korean in most cases. So when I want to say cars of the color green, I'm going to say color green, the color green first, and then car next. And yes, there is something that I can do as the exact equivalent of, but I will omit it because it's usually too obvious anyway, and it's extremely poetic if you use it. So I'm going to say the color green, 초록색. And then, yeah, car, 차. And then like, 좋아하다. Of course, I don't want its display form, right? 좋아하다. I did place the verb like, but I don't want its display form. I want its actual form in present tense. So let's go to inflection route number 1 to, yes, get the 요 ending, the base form ending. Okay, so we know exactly what to do, right? Because of the 요 ending, we are in inflection route number 1, and we have a situation where the display form of the word that we are using ends with the ha syllable once ta is removed. In this case, we're going to apply a 3-step formula, right? Remove ta, change ha into he, and then 드디어, finally, you can attach the ending. Okay, so exactly. So this is what I will do. Remove ta, of course, and then change ha into he, and then attach the ending. And of course, I am not going to give the H sound a clear H sound. It's going to be practically silent, right? Because it is somewhere in the middle of a word. So I'm not going to say 좋아해요. I'm just going to say 좋아해요. So now we have the actual form, present tense of the verb like, which is like. Okay, so now we have the whole 문장. It's just that I was omitted because it's too obvious. Articles were omitted, us and thus, and of was omitted. Okay, so 초록색 차 좋아해요. 초록색 차 좋아해요. 초록색 차 좋아해요. So now I'm saying something along the lines of I like green cars. I just changed the structure of the sentence because in Korean you cannot use green as an attributive adjective. So I changed it into I like cars of the color green. I used of so that I can basically say this without using an attributive adjective, but by using two nouns. And once again, yes, of. You can attach the particle 의, the 의 particle, and it technically plays the role of. However, once again, it is not used that often, and if you do use it, it sounds usually extremely poetic. Okay, so 초록색 차 좋아해요. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Should we continue? Okay. And, well, now I just talked about how you would use a color that can only be a noun and say something like, I like green cars. We figured out a way to say something like, I like green cars without having to use a color as an attributive adjective. Okay, well, now, then, how would you say something like, the car is green, when I have to use a color as a predicative adjective? Once again, I can't use green as a predicative adjective. Then it means that I cannot say exactly the same thing using the same structure of sentence. I have to figure out another way of doing it. And, yes, well, the best way of doing it would be then to use a subject complement, right? What is a subject complement? When you're saying a noun is a noun. For example, if I'm going to say I am, let's say, a singer. Okay, so in Korean, I will omit is, am, was, were, are, and articles, us and does. That leaves me with two nouns, including pronouns, right? A noun is a noun. I am a singer. So in that case, we call this the subject and we call this the subject complement, right? Well then, if I have to say something along the lines of the car is green, well, I don't need a predicative adjective. I can just say the car is the color green. So I can say 차 So instead of saying the car is green, I can say the car, the subject, the car is the color green. So yeah, I figured out a way to say basically the same thing, but without using a predicative adjective, but instead using just two nouns again. So there's nothing that you can't say just because you can't use a color as an adjective. You can just figure out another way of doing it. So don't feel like you are severely limited when you have a noun, a color, that can only be a noun. Exactly. So no, in this case, no the, no is. So we have the subject car and we have the color green. We're going to use the noun, the color green. Okay, exactly. So 차, subject, and then we need the subject complement, color green, 초록색. However, a Korean sentence cannot end with a subject complement, right? So if you do end up in a situation like this where it seems like it will end with a subject complement, then you have to place an ending mark behind it, right? In Korean, technically speaking, you cannot let a sentence end with a subject complement. right? So we're going to place something called an ending mark. Okay, so now, of course, you can use ending marks in all sorts of ways. But for now, let's use, yes, the most basic forms. What are the most basic forms of ending marks? Yes, you have to take a look into the pronunciation of the subject complement. If it ends with a consonant, then attach 이에요. And if it ends with a vowel, then attach 에요. And once again, a little tip when it comes to using the vowel version, this syllable right here, you see the double vowel 예, but when it is being used as an ending mark, it will not be actually pronounced as 예, it will just be pronounced as 에. Okay, so in this case, if I want to say something like the car is green, then I'm just going to say the car is the color green. I'm using just two nouns, therefore I'm using a subject and I'm going to use the noun the color green as the subject complement, therefore I will attach an ending mark behind it. Okay, so 차 초록색이에요. 차 초록색이에요. 차 초록색이에요. Okay? Does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Okay, so yes, you can always figure out how to say, well, whatever you want to say, even though you are using a color that can only be a noun. Okay, so let's say I tell someone, I'm looking for my friend's car. And this person says, well, I'll help you look for it. Well, what does your friend's car look like? And I can say, well, the car is the color green. 차 초록색이에요. And plus, if you are placing the sentence in that kind of a context, well, car can be too obvious, right? Because this person said, well, what does your friend's car look like? Yeah, I'm going to say, well, it's the color green. So, yes, you don't need a predicative adjective. 초록색이에요. Okay, so that's how you would use these colors that can only be nouns. So what are the typical examples of colors that can only be nouns? Yes, once again, yes, we looked at it a little while ago, right? Brown, purple, gray, orange, green, pink. 갈색, 보라색, 회색, 주황색, 초록색, 녹색, 분홍색, poetic trap. Okay, so that's why, yes, if you look at the bottom of page number 2, yes, you might have some questions. Then what does it look like when you use a color that can only be a noun to modify another word? That's what we just talked about. How can you use it as a way of saying something like, I found the orange box. Once again, yes, in English, because you can use orange as an attributive adjective, you can use it to directly modify box and say, I found the orange box. But in Korean, because 주황색, orange, is a very typical example of a color that can only be a noun, I'm going to say, I found the box of the color orange. Therefore, I'm going to say, 주황색 상자 찾았어요. So, and also, how do I say something is purple? Once again, this means how do I use, what should I do when I want to use a color as a predicative adjective, but in Korean I can't? Well, once again, then just use it as a subject complement and give it an ending mark. That's what we just did together. So the bag is the color purple instead of saying the bag is purple. So that's why you see an ending mark here. 가방 보라색이에요. Because if you're using an adjective, you don't see ending marks, right? Ending marks are something that are attached to subject complements. And once again, only a noun can be a subject complement. Okay, so that's what you have to keep in mind when you have one of these colors. They will say, well, we can only be nouns. So you have to know how to do this if you were to use us in, well, all sorts of ways. Okay, so let's take a look into a couple of more examples then, just for practice. Oops. So let's say I'm looking for a cat. Okay, so I think the cat ran away this way. Okay, so I want to, let's say, rescue this cat or whatever the context may be. So I'm going to ask someone, did you see an orange cat? I think it came this way. No. Did you see an orange cat? So right now, in English, I'm trying to use the color orange as an attributive adjective. However, well, in Korean, orange happens to be an example of a color that can only be a noun, so I cannot use it as an attributive adjective. So instead of saying orange cat, I have to say cat of the color orange, right? So that's why it's going to be, did you see? Yes. A cat of the color orange. So now it doesn't matter if I can't use orange as an adjective. It doesn't matter. I figured out a way of saying basically the same thing using it as a noun. Okay, so then how are you going to say it? Did you see a cat of the color orange? Okay, so first, what are we going to do? We know how to build sentences, right? So of course, I'm not going to place did in front of a question sentence that already has a verb as an auxiliary verb. That's something that you wouldn't do in Korean, so I'm going to get rid of it. But if I do, well, there's a fundamental issue, right? That issue being, now there is nothing that indicates past tense, so the verb has to do it itself. So I'm going to say see, but saw. And of course, I'm talking to you. So we have the verb see and no articles. And when you are attaching two nouns by having of stay in between, do not separate them when it comes to part of speech. Meaning, if one is an object, they are all the object. Okay, so we have the verb see but saw and the object cat of the color green. Okay, so yeah, I don't need an adjective. It's okay. So how are we going to do this? I'm going to say, of course, object first. And once again, when you are using of, keep two things in mind. Have the order between the two nouns reversed and do not place of. Of is extremely poetic. Okay, so first the color orange, 주황색. And of course, because the H is somewhere in the middle, I am not going to give it an H sound. It's going to be practically silent, right? 주황색. Okay, 주황색. And then 고양이, cat. So I'm saying cat of the color orange. It's just that of is invisible. 주황색, 고양이. And then, yes, 보다. But of course, it's a display form. It's the display form of the verb see, right? I don't want its display form. I don't want the ta ending, so I want its actual form in past tense, right? So let's go to inflection route number 1 to go get it. So we are in inflection route number 1 because of the past tense ending, right? And we have a situation where the display form that we are using ends with the O vowel. In this case, we will apply a 3-step formula, right? Remove ta, and then add an extra vowel and form a double vowel that no longer sounds like O, but now sounds like wa. And then 드디어, finally, you can attach the ending. 보았어요. 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 So now you have the actual form present tense of see, which is saw. Okay, and then place a 물음표, and now we have the whole 문장 sentence, right? So I can say 주황색 고양이 보았어요. And of course, once again, I am not going to give it a clear H sound. It's going to be practically silent, right? 주황색 고양이 보았어요. 주황색 고양이 보았어요. Okay? Does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Okay, so now, once again, I'm looking for a cat. I'm looking for a 고양이. So I'm asking this person who was here the whole time. I'm going to say, hey, did you see a cat come this way? Did you see an orange cat? 주황색 고양이 봤어요? Did you see a cat of the color orange? Now, this person is going to say, I did see a cat. 고양이 봤어요. I saw a cat. 근데, however, but, I don't think it's the cat that you're looking for because the cat that I saw is, in this case, let's say, gray. Okay, the cat is gray. So, yes, I did see a cat. A cat did come this way, but the cat is gray. I don't think it's the cat that you're looking for. Okay, so in this case, I need to use a color as a predicative adjective, but once again, gray is not a color that can be an adjective to begin with. So, it can only be a noun. 회색. Okay, so then what do you do when you have to use a color as a predicative adjective? Yeah, you change it into a noun, you keep it as a noun, and you say, you change the structure of the sentence into a sentence in which you have a subject and a subject complement. In other words, say, a noun is a noun. Okay, so for example, if I say, this is a pen. Okay, so in this case, we're going to take out is, am, was, were, are, no articles, which leaves us with only two nouns, right? Including pronouns. So when you're saying a noun is a noun, then yes, this would be the subject and this would be the subject complement. So this is how we're going to say it. We're going to say the cat is the color gray. Okay, so I figured out a way of saying it. Okay, so no the, no articles, and no is, am, was, were, are. So we have a noun is a noun. So cat, the color gray. So subject, subject complements. Okay, so we know what cat is. 고양이, 고양이. And then we know the noun, not the adjective. We know the noun, the color gray, right? 회색. Now I am really going to give it an H sound because it is no longer at the somewhere in the middle of a word, it's at the very start of a word. Okay, so 고양이, 회색. But once again, a Korean sentence can never ever end with a subject complement, right? So once again, we're going to use an ending mark. Okay, and yes, because the subject complement ends with a consonant, the pronunciation of it, I will attach 이에요 as the ending mark. Okay, if it was a subject complement that ends with a vowel, then it would have been 에요. But right now, we are talking about using colors as nouns. Therefore, you will have 색 at the very end. So once again, if you see 색 at the very end, it means that that color is being used as a noun. Okay, so because there's 색 here, it ends with a consonant. Therefore, I'm going to say 이에요. So instead of saying the cat is gray, I can say the cat is the color gray. 고양이 회색이에요. 고양이 회색이에요. 고양이 회색이에요. Okay, so yes. Now, page number 3. We will move on to page number 3 in the next live. And in page number 3, we will start talking about, yes, well, colors that can be adjectives, that can be nouns, but also adjectives. The typical examples would be, now you start seeing colors such as red, blue, yellow, black, black, and white. Okay, so this is what we will start talking about when we move on to page number 3.